The Eldridge Street Museum is among the most intriguing and beautiful in New York. And I'm thrilled to be moderating this evening of food, history, and community with Leah Koenig, the author of the fabulous new book, Portico, Cooking and Feasting in Rome's Jewish Kitchen, and with Arthur Schwartz, known not only as the food maven, but also affectionately as the Schwartz who ate New York. Leah is the goddess of modern Jewish cuisine. Arthur is the eminence gris of other culinary worlds. The history of New York City food, the food of Naples and southern Italy, and his own gemütlich spin on Jewish home cooking with Yiddish recipes revisited. Many of you know Arthur as the host of WOR's Food Talk for almost 2 decades. I know Arthur as one of my closest friends. We met in the kitchen of Gracie Mansion in 1978 when I was Ed Koch's chef and Arthur was food editor and restaurant critic of New York Daily News. And I have Arthur to thank for introducing me to Leah. We just figured out it was maybe 9 years ago. So thank you, Arthur. Leah and Arthur are each the authors of 7 acclaimed cookbooks, scores of magazine and newspaper articles, with multitudinous awards to boot. And you can read more about their wonderful careers in the bios that have been prepared for you. I think they're at your seats. So, tonight we've come to celebrate the publication of Leah's new book, accompanied by Arthur's unique perspectives, as we take a deep dive into the thousands-year-old culinary heritage that has enlivened the flavors of Rome's Jewish kitchen. How many of you have been to Rome? Okay. How many of you have not been to Rome? That's about 6. Okay. So you will be going for sure after this talk. And how many of you have eaten fried artichokes? Same group. Okay. Excellent. It is a b'sher to be presenting Leah's book in this sacred place. A National Historic Landmark built in 1887, the Eldridge Street Synagogue, now the museum at Eldridge Street, is an architectural symbol of the aspirations of the Jewish immigrants who came to New York, mostly from Eastern Europe, between 1820 and 1924. Rome's Jewish community has a similar resonance, but one that began 2,000 years ago and whose people hailed from Spain, Portugal, and North Africa. According to Bonnie Diamond, the museum's executive director, this building stands as a testament to Jewish cultural traits everywhere. The need to remember, the impulse to celebrate, and the obligation to instruct. Tonight, we get to do all 3. Yet it is a particularly poignant moment. 70 years ago, today, in 1943, the Nazis rounded up 1,000 Jews on the streets of Rome and sent them to Auschwitz. 1 year later, 16 returned. Okay, so this is what Gwyneth Paltrow had to say about Leah's book. And I quote, "A gorgeous, heartfelt book that shines light on a uniquely delicious corner of Roman cuisine. A fascinating read and a delight to cook from." And Arthur wrote a superb and scholarly review, so that was very, very helpful. So Leah, this question is for you. How did this book come about? Why Portico? And how does it have such a deeply resonant feeling for you, despite your not being a Roman Jew?
Wish I was. Before I say anything, I just want to say I've been writing about Jewish food for about 17 years. And if you had told me when I first started that I would get to share a stage with Rozanne and Arthur, I would have said, your mouth to God's ears. So it is, but they are my inspirations, and it's just really an honor to be with them here and to have you guys all here as well. So thank you for coming, and thanks to Eldridge Street for hosting us. So as Rozanne mentioned in the introduction, Rome's Jewish history spans 2,000 years. The first Jews who came to Rome came as emissaries of the Maccabees. So if you're familiar with the Hanukkah story, they were literally fleeing persecution from the ancient Greeks and came to Rome, where they were met with, if not open arms, at least tolerant, accepting arms. And the community has survived ever since. Today there's about 16 or 17,000 Jews in Rome, which is minuscule compared to the 3 million people who live there. But their history is so ancient and so interwoven with the fabric of Rome at large that I feel like their presence is bigger, larger than the numbers. So yes, I am not Roman. My family is Ashkenazi, Lithuanian, German, So I grew up eating brisket and latkes and matzo balls and all the, hamantash and all the things that we all love. And when I started writing about Jewish food and I started expanding my scope, because you can only write about matzo balls so many times before you start looking for other things, it happened to coincide with a trip that my husband and I took to Rome for our honeymoon. And, I had been to Rome before and had been to the Jewish ghetto before. We can talk about what that was in a second. And we were invited to a Shabbat dinner at a Roman Jewish caterer's house, kosher caterer's house. And when we got there, first of all, I had been a vegetarian for 10 years. And we got to his house, and everything on the table was meat. Like, there was stracotto di manzo, which is like their beef stew, and this amazing veal and chicken meatball stew with celery that's very delicious. And I said to my husband, Yoshi, I was like, if the phrase "when in Rome" ever applies, it's tonight. And I'm going to eat everything. And I ate everything, and I'm so glad I did. But what really stuck out to me, and this is where I'm going to answer your question, I promise, is nothing on the table that Shabbat dinner was familiar to me. Nothing, I had eaten none of those dishes before ever, let alone at a Shabbat table. But because the context of Shabbat was so, we blessed the bread and we blessed the wine, and we were talking like old friends, and a couple of bottles of good wine helped with that. And the context was so familiar that the dishes felt familiar immediately. And it crystallized for me very early in my career that Jewish food is so vast and so broad and so deep and has so much to share that I could make a career, or I wanted to make a career out of exploring as much of it as I could and sharing as many stories as I could. So I didn't know I was going to write a book about Roman Jewish food back in 2008 or 9. I can't remember when that trip was. But when I decided which book I wanted to write after my last one, I knew I wanted to give something back to the city that had given me so much. So that's why I wrote Portico. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. Arthur. Yes. Hi. How did the food of Italy become such an important theme in your career?
Oh, that's easy.
But I just want to say, Arthur, not only as an author and scholar, but as the creator of your cooking school in Siciliano.
Well, let's start with a little boy who lived upstairs from a Neapolitan family, and I was always hungry. So my mother would send me down. My father didn't get home until 7, and we had to stay up until he got home to eat dinner. But at 5, she would send me downstairs to the Neapolitans. So my first solid food was ziti with ragu. And that set me, off for life. So I grew up with a lot of Southern Italians who, by the time I became a professional food writer, their food was really disparaged. I mean, even now you can read reviews and they just, it's just a red sauce place, as if red sauce is something terrible. It's my lifeblood, you know. So I wrote Naples at Table, my first Italian book, because I wanted to delve into the cuisine for my own interest, but also I wanted to validate this cuisine that everybody at home was disparaging. I knew there was a real Neapolitan cuisine there, and now I joke, certainly I had a cooking school in Paestum, which is south of Salerno, which is south of Naples. You best know the Amalfi Coast is in Salerno, not in Naples. But anyway, I used to joke that because everybody wanted to go to Tuscany. I think still Americans just want to go to Tuscany. They think the entire country of Italy is Tuscany, but it's not. It's just one of 20 regions. And then Tuscan food, I always say the Bible of Tuscan food is like this big, but the Bible of Neapolitan food is this big. It's a much greater and more extensive cuisine. And in fact, the entire south of Italy was the Kingdom of Naples until 1861. So they're a very new country. And of course, the South, just like in the US, the North and the South don't get along, except that in the case of Italy, the North controls the country and can torture Southerners, and still does. So that's my history with Italian food. And once I got started on Naples, which is the mother cuisine, so to speak, of the entire South, I love to travel around Italy. By the way, Italy is a much better place to vacation than to live. I tried living there for a short time, and as an American, I could not stand the mess that Italy is, and continues to be. But Italians are used to it, so they think all these disasters that happen every day, like the mail going to the wrong house, which happened to me this week. That's why I'm mentioning it. Something was sent to me from Italy, I don't know where it went, but someplace else in Brooklyn. In any case, I kept traveling around the South, and I ended up writing a second book called The Southern Italian Table. It was supposed to be a huge book, but one of those horror publishing stories, which you guys fortunately don't know about, it ended up to be a small book, but I still have the large book in my computer. If anybody wants some obscure recipes from Molise, I have them.
It's a small, wonderful book.
I actually cook from that book to this day, yeah.
Just this morning, Arthur and I talk a lot in the morning. Just this morning I said, Arthur, is the Jewish ghetto in Trastevere? And he burst out laughing. He said, that was 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So
the Jews, Trastevere, the word, means the other side of the Tevere, which is the river, the Tiber River. So there was a Jewish community in ancient times. Leah knows more about this than I do. But the Jewish community now is not even in the ghetto. You have to be very rich to live in the ghetto. It's central, historic Rome. And I know a rich boy who lives in the ghetto, and he said, but you have to have a billionaire father to be able to have a house like we have.
Well, it's actually funny because the only Jews who still live in the ghetto are the ones whose families were too poor to leave when they were able to. And so now they're living in the hippest, most expensive real estate in the city.
So I go to the ghetto a lot, but not because it's Jewish, but because you have to walk through it to get anywhere else. If you're in central historic Rome, the ghetto is right there.
Well, Leah and Arthur, so this brings me to really the heart of why we're here, which is Leah's book, Portico. So we definitely want to know why it's
Should we explain Portico?
Portico, exactly. And what exactly is La Cucina Ebraica?
Should I answer the Portico one first? Okay, so yes, the book is called Portico, and that was not a fight, it was a discussion with my wonderful publisher, Norton, who I love and am grateful for. Because a lot of my books have names like Modern Jewish Cooking or The Jewish Cookbook, which are they tell you what the book is, but they're not particularly evocative. And I said, I really want this book to have a more poetic title. And so when you go to the ghetto neighborhood, ghetto is actually an Italian word originally. I'm sure some folks know that. literally translates to copper foundry.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and the reason it became connected with a physical location is because the first ghetto in Venice, which is about 40 years older than the one in Rome, was literally next to a copper foundry called a ghetto. And so it was, the name comes from the proximity to the physical structure, and has come to mean, what we know of it today. But so at one end of the ghetto in Rome is a structure called Portico de Ottavia, or Octavia's Porch, basically. It's an ancient ruin at this point that was a lot of things over the centuries and millennia, but for many, many hundreds of years was a fish market. It's the place where Jews in Rome got a lot of their sustenance, although during ghetto times, which was the 1550s to 1871, so over 300 years, Jews were not allowed to purchase certain types of fish. There was actually a marble slab that I think is still in the museum there. And when you were at the market, if the head and the tail flopped over each side of the marble slab, it was considered too big, and Jews were not allowed to buy that fish. Or white flesh fish, except for bacala, which the salted cod. So to me, the portico, the physical structure feels like the entrance to the ghetto neighborhood, so I wanted the book to be called that. And also I love that the word itself basically means entrance or front porch, so I thought it was a poetic way of entering into a cuisine that I think a lot of folks don't know as much about.
I have to ask Leah, I keep meaning to ask her this now for a year.
You know my phone number, Arthur.
I noticed in the book you cooked with a limentani. Yeah. Did you ever go to across from the Portico d'Ottavia is a store underneath the synagogue called Limentani, which I didn't know until I read Leah's book. Is a family, it's a Jewish family, but it's Ginori closeouts and other and Waterford Crystal and everything closeout prices. I came home with a suitcase full of stuff from 25, 30 years ago from Limentani, and I still have it.
There are about 7 surnames of Roman Jews. There's Pavoncello, there's Limentani, there's not very many. So in my book, I interview someone who's a woman named Michaela Pavoncello and a man named Michele Pavoncello. So that was really difficult for my copy editor, who's like, which Pavoncello are you talking? They're not related.
And they're not related?
Yes. No. So the Limentani that
She's not related to the store?
I don't
that's
think
too
so.
bad.
I don't think so.
I thought maybe get an extra discount.
Amazing.
So one of the fascinating things about reading this book cover to cover is that some things really are not clear. Not about Leah's work, but about the history of Roman Jewish food. So if you can both explain what was Roman food, what is Roman Jewish food, and what was this like before the Libyans arrived in 1967? And I think, Leah, you will definitely talk about this because you're probably the foremost scholar on this community now of Libyan Jews in Rome.
Who knew?
Who knew? So if you can begin to explain this to us, and then there's the relationship between Jewish food and restaurants that are and are not kosher. So it is a little complicated to figure this all out, but the two of you are very knowledgeable.
I've actually never met a kosher Jew in Italy.
There are some.
There are some, yeah.
For sure. But like lots
of places. Or
places,
Jews that eat carbonara,
Right. Well, like lots of places in Europe, I feel like most Jews would identify themselves as Orthodox because they go to an Orthodox synagogue, but aren't necessarily Orthodox in practice.
The same here.
Yeah. Well, maybe.
Sorta.
I don't know. I mean,
there's also food that is a la Judea and a la Romana. So you need to help us here.
Let Leah talk about the Jewish part. But Roman food, I always say Roman food is shepherd food. It's all based on lamb. And that's not true. But there's a lot of lamb. And of course, the cheese of Rome is pecorino romano or pecorino sardo. It's sheep's milk cheese. And sheep's milk ricotta plays an important role in Roman cuisine. But Romans eat a ton of vegetables, as do the Jews. And the thing I have to ask about Leah is, now I know that there are some products mentioned in your book that substitute for pork, but I can't find any of them in New York. So if I if I want to make something that has a kosher pork substitute, what would I use?
Can I get to that part second?
Sure.
Okay, so your confusion makes a lot of sense because the Jewish community in Rome is so ancient. There are a lot of dishes where it's really hard to say, like chicken or egg, which came first. Is it alla Romana, Roman style, or alla Judea, Jewish style? And there's a lot of dishes that, including fritto misto, which I'm sure lots of folks know. If you don't, it's basically Italian tempura, fried, battered, vegetables, seafood, cheese sometimes, that anything, yeah, you can fry anything, that people say actually is from the Roman Jewish ghetto originally, and they call it pezzetti fritti, or like little mixed fried pieces, which I love. I like that name better. But Roman Jewish food is similar to Roman food in a lot of ways. A lot of vegetables, like you said, although interestingly, a lot of vegetables that we think of as very Italian were originally considered Jewish vegetables. Artichokes, eggplant, fennel, those were all things introduced from elsewhere, along with the tomato, right? We can't think of Italian food without tomatoes, but they're from the New World, right? So they weren't even part of the cuisine right. So
I have to say, when I talk about Neapolitan food, I always say it's a European cuisine based on American ingredients, which it is. Tomatoes, help me here, vanilla, chocolate, squash of every kind, beans. There were no, believe it or not, beans are American and were not brought to Europe until the 16th century. So that's a relatively new food in Italy.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, so like lots of Jewish communities everywhere, Roman Jews ate the foods of their neighbors and adapted them for the kosher laws and adapted them for the laws of Shabbat. So you will find a lot of crossover. To me, what makes Roman Jewish food special is the fact that you have this Sephardic influence, right? In the 15th, 16th century, thousands of Jews moved from Spain and from Portugal and from Sicily, either
Also Calabria.
right, South Italy,
Yeah,
right.
South Italy, not just Sicily.
Right. And that's because at the time, Italy was not a unified country. It was nation states, right? And the south of Italy was ruled by Spain. So all of the rules of the Spanish Inquisition also applied there. So you'll see things like desserts with ground nuts in them. Actually, almost all Roman Jewish desserts have nuts. So if you have a nut allergy, there's only like three desserts in the book you can enjoy. Sorry. And you'll see things like raisins and pine nuts in a lot of both sweet and savory applications. There's a wonderful dish of sautéed spinach with raisins and pine nuts that is so simple and so good. And so something that sets Roman Jewish food apart is the fact that you have this Sephardic influence, and also just their absolute undying love for two things. One is frying foods in oil, which is partially because during the ghetto times, Jews were not allowed to have a lot of professions, and one of the few professions they were allowed to have was being a frigatori, which literally meant like people who could sell fried food on the street. Like food trucks, the original food trucks. And so they became known for their fried dishes. And the other reason is because houses in the ghetto didn't have ovens for the most part, which is probably true of like lots of houses at that time. So cooking everything on the stovetop was mandatory. And I think of frying foods as kind of expensive, or you're using a lot of oil and you have to throw it away or whatever, reuse it. But at the time, it was actually a very economical way to cook because olive oil was plentiful. And
well, also you didn't need a lot of fuel to cook the food. A small flame would get your oil hot. And also you could, by the way, Naples is known for fried food, and I'm sure that a lot of the Roman stuff comes from Jews coming from the South.
And I'm pretty sure the artichoke came up with Jews from the South.
Maybe,
also.
Pestum, where I used to have my cooking school, is famous for its artichokes. I never saw an artichoke growing anywhere near Rome. But if you go to the South, you see endless, as far as the eye can see, fields of artichokes.
What
and
is it
also
about
the artichokes that in Rome, Rome has its own artichokes. Which
they don't have a choke.
They don't have a choke.
Which makes them so much easier to use.
Right.
You don't have to remove a bunch of weird hairs.
No, I've actually, Leah, given up on prepping artichokes because it's a lot of work. And I've discovered Whole Foods frozen artichoke hearts.
Godsend. And they
You
taste
want them?
delicious.
They're fabulous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can use them.
They're fabulous.
Can you talk us through how to make that then? Because they're so hard to make.
No, it does not make fried artichokes.
You wouldn't do the
Okay,
fried
you would
artichoke.
not use it for that.
No, but Roman Jews use artichokes in frittatas and pastas.
Everywhere.
Carpaccio. They do also, well, that you would need a fresh one for.
You need a fresh one, right?
Um,
But these are easy. I defrost them actually, a half an hour at the most out of the freezer, and I just put them in a skillet with olive oil, garlic, and I don't always have mint in the house, so I use dried mint, which gives them a little maybe Middle Eastern edge. And that's it. Cover the pan and let them stew in the oil in their own moisture. That's all. It takes 20 minutes.
Well, I always believe that the soul of a book, a cookbook especially, can be found in the table of contents. And I was very struck by the fact that Leah's book, the first chapter, is vegetables. And you also mention, and I quote, that you have a particular fondness, a soft spot for difficult vegetables. So in addition to artichokes, what else would be
I think
considered
there
a
are 4,
difficult
maybe
vegetable?
6 pages on how to prep an artichoke in Leah's book. And I have to tell you, I wrote a review of the book, and I used the word project in quotes because you say that was your word, that these are terrific, but they're a project. Got to tell you, the editor
Don't
didn't know
scare
what that...
people away. There's lots of easy recipes in the book.
No. There's lots and lots of easy recipes, but I'm not attempting fried artichokes anymore.
Fried artichokes to me are like Hanukkah's coming up, and I will absolutely make fried artichokes for Hanukkah, but I won't make them the rest of the year. I actually think it's worth booking a ticket to Rome and going and eating them at one of the many, many, many. There's lots of amazing Jewish restaurants now in the Roman Jewish ghetto neighborhood.
Well, I just want to say I read something by Ruth Reichel in her wonderful newsletter called La Brief about the artichoke. She just had some very good ones
Who's
at
this?
Ruth Reichel at Isodi, which is a
A
Italian
trendy
restaurant in New
that
York.
we're not going to.
What, Arthur?
I said it's a trendy restaurant that we're
you're
not going to.
Okay, but this was her description of them.
I'll tell you who
Quote,
has fried
They
artichokes.
taste like potato chips with a college education.
All right. No, I'm going to go way off topic here, but Leah has a recipe in the book that she served to me at her house, and I didn't get it. It's chicken cooked on top of potatoes. And I got home and I said, I didn't get enough of those potatoes. So I made I've now made the recipe 3 times.
Only for the potatoes, because it's the best part.
The what?
It's the potatoes are the best part.
Oh, no, I make it. Everybody loves the chicken, too. So they are the best part. But because it's a bed of potatoes that soak up all that chicken fat from you cooking I do thighs only. Anyway, that recipe, it ends up, is from La Tanzi, which is an Italian restaurant on West 46th Street. And do you know the whole history of this thing? Because I was there.
Yeah.
Nobody goes to the theater district after 8 o'clock to eat. And they had to fill the restaurant. So they're Jewish, so they decided to do a Roman Jewish specials after 8 o'clock, which of course brought an audience. It was perfectly good food, but it had nothing at all to do with Italy, as far as I could tell at the time. But this dish, I never had it there. I don't even know if they ever served that. That might have been their family recipe.
Maybe so.
But all it is, it's very easy. Yeah. One of her easy recipes is garlic and rosemary, and I guess oil, and you just make a lot of chopped garlic and rosemary, and you toss all your potatoes, cut into wedges. I cut it into slices now. Cut into wedges, and then you put you roast the chicken right on top of the bed of potatoes. I do 40. I don't even know what your recipe says anymore, but mine is I do 450 degrees for 45 minutes. It's easy to remember, and it's sensational.
This is very flattering when you actually sit next to the person who created the recipe and tell them how to make it and how you've made it, and you've made it 3 times
anyway,
now, and this is what you make for your
Well,
company.
I really do want to.
It made me today, before I came here, I said, I wonder if Latanzi is still in business.
They are.
And they are.
Yeah.
And not only are they still in business, they used to have fried artichokes on the menu for this Jewish dinner that were nothing at all like artichoke a la Judea. They were just what I told you, artichoke hearts, probably frozen ones too. But they do have, there was a picture on their website of a real artichoke a la Judea, so maybe they're making them.
Maybe.
Maybe we don't have to go to Rome for them.
Maybe. Yeah, that would be great. I do want to answer the
46th
question
Street
about.
is as difficult to get to these days as Rome.
I do want to answer
Yeah.
the question about artichokes, though, because literally there is, like, if you could find a patron saint of Roman Jewish cuisine, I know that's a little weird to say, it is the artichoke. And when you go to the Roman Jewish ghetto today, when I was there researching the book, I literally saw a fight break out between 2 elders in the community about how to trim an artichoke correctly. There was finger pointing, there was, your mother does it wrong, you did it wrong, you don't know what you're talking about. And it's funny, but it's also just a testament to how important the artichoke is to Roman Jews.
Food in general.
Food in general, right. But really, the artichoke is deeply important. And I feel like as an American, I grew up eating artichokes just steamed with butter in the center, and you dipped it.
Yeah.
And so part of my hope for this book is not necessarily that you make fried artichokes a centerpiece of your weeknight cooking, but that you take away new ways to cook with an artichoke. And so I give a lot of information about the history of it and how to prep it, and then also when you can use the frozen ones
So
or
I'm
the
going to
canned
give you a
ones.
little trick that I don't use anymore. When you're prepping artichokes, they oxidize very, very quickly. So the usual instruction is to get a bowl of water with some lemon squeezed in, and as you prep the artichokes, you rub them with lemon, and then you put them in the lemon water, and so a chef told me, he said, yes, but the other item is cold. Cold slows down the oxidation. So when I learned how to prep artichokes, my chef mentor would put me in the walk-in refrigerator, and I had to sit in the walk-in to do all these artichokes so that they wouldn't get warmed. So, but he said, nowadays, I just put ice cubes in the lemon water.
Leah's the book to definitely look at for that.
Yeah, 4 pages.
And for many, many other recipes. Leah, how many are there altogether?
About 100.
Wonderful. And you mentioned that artichokes and fried artichokes were the hallmark of the Roman ghetto food. But what are some of the others? And Arthur, I think you have a funny story about pizza ebraica, which is not a pizza at all, but it's a cookie with a lot of history. So either one
Leah
of you
and
can
I
talk
have the
about
same
it.
opinion about this. So
Has
Should I
anyone
start,
who's
or
been to
we
Rome
talk
had
about
pizza
this?
ebraica? Do you know
it's
this?
this
cookie?
place is called
Okay.
Pasticceria Boccione,
200 years old.
and it's on the corner, right in the middle of the main street of the ghetto. And you'll know it because there's almost always a line outside.
There's no signage.
There's no,
It's a tiny little hole in the wall, but there is always a line.
always a line.
Yeah.
And then, when the women are really rude and nasty to you behind the counter, you'll know you're in the right place.
So, yes.
So, yeah, tell
Why
them
is it
about
burnt on top
So,
always?
so the history of this cookie, it's pizza ebraica, literally just means like Jewish style pie. Pizza is kind of an ancient word, an older word for pie. Before it meant sauce and cheese and all the things.
No,
that we think of today.
it's used for pie.
Yeah, is it still?
Yeah.
Okay. So it is one of the more delicious things that I never realized I would love because it's very humble looking. It's basically a chewy bar cookie. The ladies at Boccioni would not give me the recipe, which I completely respect, but so I had to reverse
don't.
engineer it. And I think I got fairly close.
No, you got better.
Oh, thank you.
I hate hers. They're better.
So it's basically like an inch thick rectangular bar cookie filled with almonds, raisins and pine nuts, which speak to the Sephardic influence, The women at Boccioni use candied cherries. I use dried cherries because I don't like the artificial stuff, but you can go however you want. And they're chewy and crisp on top. And the women at Boccioni, they always burn them. Their ovens are ancient, so they always have this like burnt patina, and it adds to their charm, but I don't recommend trying that at home.
I don't think they add to the charm at all. Yeah. I think they're burnt cookies.
One of the most important features of this book, because very few people have written about this, is the influx of the Libyan Jews in 1967. So if you could give us a little history about how that came about and how they have really been integrated into the community and really are considered Roman, and lots of intermarriage now. And
yeah.
I've learned a lot from your book.
Yeah, so there's kind of 3 subgroups of, lineages in the Roman Jewish community, which for 17,000 people, that's a lot of diversity. It's kind of incredible. So there's people who can say they can trace their families back to the time of, the ancient Romans. I don't know how you do that, but they're called Italkim. They're like the original Roman Jews who came back with the Maccabees 2,000 years ago. Then there's the Sephardi Jews who came after the Inquisition, and at this point, enough history has passed that those 2 communities are pretty intermixed, and the food has completely commingled. And then in 1967, about 4,000, 5,000 Jews from Libya moved to Rome, and because Libya had been an Italian colony, a lot of them spoke some Italian, if not, they weren't fluent. And they settled in a neighborhood called Piazza Bologna, which is, one of the Jewish neighborhoods. And at first they were treated with a lot of xenophobia, right? Like the more established Jewish community was like, you're not part of us, you're something totally different. But now, however many years later that is, 50, I can't do math like that. Come on. I'm a writer, I'm not a mathematician. 67.
It's almost 60 years ago.
Yes. So now, a generation, 2 generations later, you're starting to see families where one parent is Libyan Jewish and one parent is, the more kind of older Roman Jewish. And you're starting to see the food commingle. One of my favorite examples, I interviewed a woman named Daniela for the book who came from Libya to Rome when she was, I think, 1. So basically grew up in Rome, but has lots of memories from, her family that about Libya. And she said that at a Shabbat dinner, you're very likely now to see stracotto di manzo, which is this delicious beef stew with wine and tomato passata, it's traditionally served over rigatoni, and now you'll see it served over couscous, right? So you're starting to see moments like that. And I think it's just, as someone who studies Jewish food, those moments of seeing evolution of the cuisine in real time make me really excited. So, yeah.
I do want to ask about the 5th quarter and about some of your favorite recipes, Leah, and Arthur, just some of your favorite recipes.
Let me explain the 5th quarter. Romans eat every part of the animal, and the 5th quarter is the innards, intestines, liver, kidneys. You name it.
There's no recipes for those things in the book, though, because for 2 reasons.
They're not kosher?
Partially that, and partially because a lot of people don't eat them anymore. There is an oxtail recipe.
Yeah.
But I didn't put any lungs or tripe or anything.
Right, but that's the 5th quarter. And in fact, those innards do weigh as much as the other quarters. So it is, in fact, like a 5th quarter. But there are restaurants in Rome that specialize in 5th quarter food, mainly in Arthur.
Pistachio.
Thank you, Testaccio. Yeah, which is where the slaughterhouses were way back. Not anymore.
And interestingly, there's a restaurant in the ghetto called La Taverna del Ghetto, which was kind of the first to really, it opened in the late 90s, and it was kind of the first to really showcase Roman Jewish food from a place of pride, and now there's a bunch of restaurants in the neighborhood.
That may have been the place that I sat next to the
Oh,
Gentile couple.
Maybe,
Because
yeah.
it was in the 90s
Yeah.
when they first opened.
Yeah, there's also places
It-
like Paperno.
Well,
and,
Paperno's
but
not
those
kosher,
are not.
no.
Yes.
I must say, Paperno is a tourist place.
Yeah.
People go for the artichokes, but the last time I had the artichokes there, they were frozen and reheated and greasy and
Ashanda.
horrible. The place that's most famous for them.
So what's interesting is this restaurant is known. It was one of the first also kosher restaurants. And sometime in the last, 10 years, they gave up their kosher certification. And the reason they did that was because they serve a lot of these traditional dishes, the quinto cuarto, the fifth quarter dishes, tripe, lung, stuff that personally does not appeal to me. But the reason that they gave up their kosher certification is it's almost impossible to find those cuts of meat with the kosher certification now. And they were so committed to serving traditional Roman Jewish food that they were like, we would rather serve the traditional dishes without the hechsher, without the kosher certification, which I find really interesting.
How
that
kosher
tension.
are Roman Jews?
It's a mix, like anywhere. But what's really interesting is, so in 2018, I guess Israeli rabbinate, who has a connection with, the chief rabbi in Rome, came and said, we're concerned that artichokes have bugs in them, right? There's lots of vegetables like broccoli and asparagus and cauliflower that are tightly wound or tightly formed, and so bugs can get in and they're hard to find when you're cleaning them. And vegetables are kosher, but bugs are not kosher. So they actually said, we don't think you should be selling, eating, serving artichokes anymore. And can you imagine what what Roman Jews' response to that was? And what's interesting is the chief rabbi of Rome said, no way. Like, we've been eating this vegetable for hundreds, if not thousands of years. We know how to clean them. Basically, go away with that particular thing. But in Milan, where artichokes are not central, but there is also a Jewish community, they don't serve artichokes anymore. They were not as central to the community.
Yeah, but my understanding of it still this way was Milan is run by Brooklyn Lubavitch guy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I don't know about that. But
Yeah.
it is interesting that because artichokes are so central, they said, we're going to continue to eat them, and we're not going to bow to the pressure of us, people trying to make us go further to the right kosher-wise. So you will still find artichokes all over Rome, thank God.
So here's a little thing I learned 1,000 years ago. I had a friend who was Christian and was Catholic. I had a very Catholic mother, and he used to tease his mother that they were really Jewish because of two culinary things. They soaked in his family, they soaked all their vegetables. And that's a very Jewish thing to do. Even string beans, which there are no bugs can hide in a string bean. I still call them string beans. They're called green beans these days. I'm old enough to say string bean. But anyway, and the other thing was their last name was the name of a town. And very often, if you have a surname of a town, you're Jewish. And one famous case that I happen to know of is, does anybody remember, I hope so, Joe Bologna? Joe Bologna married Renee Taylor, who, by the way, is still kicking. She's on TikTok. She's 90. And she's very funny still. But Joe Bologna was Jewish, and his name was Bologna. So I only learned that from Renee many years later. She said, I didn't marry an Italian. I married a Jew.
If we had a lot of time tonight, I would ask this question of how Jewish food is different from one region to another in Italy, because I think there are some big changes, big variations. But one of the stories I love the most in Leah's book about why this gets a little confusing. So in Rome alone, you have Ashkenazis, and you have this Sephardic influence now mostly primarily by Libyans.
There's no Ashkenazis.
And there are no Ashkenazis at all.
There's no challah in any bakery in Rome.
That's right. There's a fascinating chapter on
It predates Ashkenazis.
Is there
the
a
challah
Sabbath
deficit.
bread?
No, they just use regular bread.
And also,
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
before I even read the book, you pointed this out to me that Roman Jews are not a pasta-oriented community. there's not a lot of pasta in your book either. No. And my big question is, what do they do? I mean, the big pasta dishes of Rome are carbonara with pork, amatriciana with pork, alla gricia with pork. So what do they all do for those?
They
I'm
read
sure-
Leah's book because Leah has recipes for all of those in her own special way with zucchini or carne seca, which is not an ingredient I knew. But the story that intrigued me so much is that how different the Passover tables are. And in Rome, they actually make a cookie with flour for Passover. And I think they had the same outrage about the artichokes. Why don't you tell the story?
Okay, so one of the women I interviewed, Gila Ottolenghi Sanders, who is a Roman Jew who now lives in Atlanta, awesome person and was super helpful. She sent me her grandmother's handwritten cookbook and all of this stuff, which a lot of people did, which was wonderful. So she was describing this Passover cookie called cimbalette, which means like little donuts, basically, or rings, yeah. And she's like, oh yeah, so they're made with flour and with citrus zest. And I was like, oh, you mean like matzah meal or cake meal or something, right? She's like, no, with actual flour. We just make them in 18 minutes, the same way you would matzah, so that they don't leaven. And I was, kind of shocked. And then she said, but about 10 years ago, again, the rabbis were like, you can't do this. This is not kosher for Passover, so you have to stop making them. And again, they were met with the similar response of like, come on, we've been doing this for hundreds of years. And so they struck this amazing compromise, which is now, in the weeks before Passover, or the days before Passover, they set up communal baking hubs in kosher kitchens, and they literally have a mashgiach, or like a kosher supervisor there, and people come and they bake their cimbalette. I'm sure people still bake them in their homes and just say, shove off, but they can sign up to do their cimbalette supervised baking so that they could do it within the 18 minutes. And I just loved that little bit of, figuring out a loophole around the law. But they also, they eat a lot of rice on Passover, which is Sephardi, and they also eat a lot of lamb, which a lot of Ashkenazi and maybe some Sephardi Jews don't because of the connection to the Paschal lamb, right? But because the community is so old, it actually predates the destruction of the temple. They eat roasted lamb at their Passover Seder. So there's a lot of difference.
But lamb is by far the most popular meat in Rome and actually all of the south of Italy.
And if you
can't get a good piece of beef, so it's lamb, and it's great lamb.
It's so good.
Yeah.
And you can eat any of those dishes any time of year you would like if you don't want to eat them on Passover.
So as I ask my last question, and you think of questions you would like to ask, because we'll have about 10 minutes for Q&A, I want to know from Leah and Arthur what they would make for dinner if we were coming to dine. That is representative of this cuisine that we're talking about.
Well, I always, not much different than what I normally do, which is a lot of vegetables to start. Artichokes, of course, if it's going to be a Roman Jewish dinner. I happen to, in the spinach season, I can't get enough spinach in me. And spinach is maybe the biggest vegetable in Rome. And I just make it with hot pepper and garlic and oil, but next time I'm going to try why not, pine nuts and raisins, which I, by the way, don't identify as so much as Sephardic as I do Arab. And it's the Arab influence from Sicily and the south of Italy. The pine nuts.
The Jews were the first people from the Arab traders, and they were the first to adopt it.
Let me say, the south of Italy was full of Arabs and Jews until the Inquisition.
Yes.
Arthur, I asked what we're having for dinner.
Oh, so I'd have spinach, artichokes.
Artichoke.
Here's something I like to do. I don't know if this is so Roman, but it may be. I make grilled squash, butternut squash, and I put it on my ridged grill. Just plain like that, hot, and cut maybe 1/4 of an inch thick. And then you layer it in a dish with some oil, vinegar, and whatever herb you want to put in. I usually just
No pecorino?
No pecorino, no cheese, no.
No cheese. Okay.
No, this is, and also, well, I don't think I would put cheese on it in any way, but if we're making a Jewish dinner, I feel like it should be somewhat kosher.
There's no meat in your dinner.
Yes, there is. You haven't gotten to the main course yet.
But actually, we have to ask Leah what we're going to eat at her
Okay,
house.
so the main course would be Leah's chicken
Oh.
on top of potatoes, which I'm doing all the time now. and I do different things with the potatoes, not just the garlic and whatever. And dessert, I must say, I make a really, really good torta caprese, which Leah has in her book by a different name. Oh, the other vegetable I would make, which is totally Roman, is concha.
Leah has a wonderful recipe for that.
Yes, and I have a wonderful recipe too, because in Naples, it's called scapece, which is short for escabeche, and it's made all over the world. You fry something and then marinate it. So in concha and escabeche, scapece are the same thing. You fry the zucchini and then you marinate it. It's so good. And
Well,
then
I'm definitely coming
in the
over.
poor days, and when people were really poor in Italy, that would be a main thing. What are you having for lunch? I'm having concha on a roll. That would be lunch.
They still do that.
And they still do that.
Yeah, because it's delicious.
And Leah, what would you serve us?
I would also make concha because it's just the most amazing thing. I would make pomodori a mezzo, which are literally just halved tomatoes that you sprinkle with garlic and salt and pepper and a little sugar to caramelize them, and douse in olive oil and bake until they're collapsing and so flavorful. Obviously,
May I say, I just made this the other day, and at 350, it took almost 2 hours.
it does take a long time.
So just to say, be patient.
But they're so good. I would make the chicken with peppers, which is kind of like a cacciatore vibe, but you roast peppers and they get really silky and flavorful, and then you braise them with chicken and tomato, and very delicious. And I would make, for dessert, the bocca di dama, which it means like woman's mouth. It's a very evocative named dessert. It's a lemony almond cake that's kind of light and fluffy and also dense and delicious and fudgy at the same time. And it's something that's eaten by both Libyan Jews and, the older Italian Jews with a different topping, but it's so good.
And I have to say, the chicken with peppers is like a #1 chicken dish of Rome, period.
So thank you all for coming. I hope we see you again here at another event.